So, in my view, I would say the whole mindset, the whole paradigm, the whole motivation as to why people are so fixated on these things is basically a dead end cul de sac within a dead end cul de sac. It's a prime and great example of modern degeneracy where a person equates the absolute lowest, most base aspects of their organism with the highest, most transcendental examples and potentials of being a human. It's a great example of 1984 in action, where ignorance is knowledge, homogeny is diversity, and a pig rolling in shit is heavenly. It's basically the self-help equivalent of the latest iPhone 14 Pro Max, the latest Rivian truck, or the latest Tesla. Basically, it's a way to simulate forward progress, boost dopamine, when in reality is actually creating the opposite effect, and is usually putting the person in a position of being a useful idiot for a larger agenda that's being pushed through. And the most entertaining and hilarious and profoundly interesting aspect of it to me is the fact that it is more or less just recapitulating original sin and thereby salvation from Christianity and from most organized religions that share this similar concept. But they're just doing it through the lens of spirituality or higher vibration consciousness, i.e., shadow work, bringing in the light, doing the work, capital T, capital W, and all the while not realizing that it's literally just the same exact thing as original sin, but just in a completely different thing. So that's one example where they're denying something. Typically, people are anti those establishments and anti those belief systems because they're restrictive and oppressive and whatever. But then they're literally doing the exact same thing, just under a different umbrella. And another great example is people will have this modern biochemical view that they believe is harmful and flawed, i.e., mainstream pharmaceutical medicine, but then they turn around and take that same ideology and attach some vague idea of spirituality, i.e., Salvationism and original sin, which really this model, this mindset, this philosophy has nothing to do and no basis in anything traditional, authentic, valid, or real. It's basically taking two really broken paradigms that you're externally saying to the world you're against, but internally and in your actual experience of life, you're trying to merge them together, which is like, of course, not going to work and not going to produce very good results. And this is basically something I've been saying since 2015, 2016. I actually just had a Facebook post pop up in my memories today, and I can put it up here somewhere where I'm basically saying the exact same thing. It's nothing new. It's just people are somehow more and more fixated on these things. So when you start from a deeply confused, obviously conflicted, contradictory, and dysfunctional basis, can you really imagine what the results are going to be? It's kind of obvious. And people, I think, really need to understand, aside from what I just said, that this stuff is not spiritual. Because just because something creates a lot of stimulation and a lot of novelty and maybe an interesting, crazy experience doesn't mean it is literally different than what it is, which is more or less bringing the contents of the sub and unconscious minds up to the aspects of your conscious awareness and stimulating various aspects of your fight or flight response to ramp up your nervous system to create these responses, and thinking that it's anything other than that. Basically going to the primal aspects of the brain and it's kind of like sorting through the recycling bin to hopefully support or enhance the process of waste removal or create some better organization. And people often report a sense of feeling more connected to the environment, more connected to the earth, which again is obviously not spiritual, since the earth and spirituality have pretty much in all of human history been different things. Because when people think of heaven and heavenly things, that's usually associated with spirituality, which is obviously the opposite of earth. But because people are so confused and degenerate and under the hypnosis of these broken paradigms, they're like, oh, it's actually just here now, and it's all the same, and it's all within my experience, and it's all within the same moment, and I have access to the same things that all these great people did. And they say all these like vague idealistic things that are kind of the most pinnacle peak example of arrogance, but all the while have no clue that that's what they're actually doing and think that's the opposite thing is occurring. Meaning, like, I'm going deep into ignorance and arrogance and delusion, but I'm telling myself that it's progress and it's spirituality and it's high-minded, which is obviously a contradiction of terms and a contradiction of anything at all that makes sense and anything at all that has any basis in any real tradition or authentic lineage or authentic thing from human history. So basically, people are saying that sorting through the most primal aspects of their brain and feeling more connected to the earth is somehow the most otherworldly, transcendental, heavenly, and thus spiritual thing a person can do. It's almost just like the people that say having sex is transcendental. It's like, well, no, it's the most primal, basic thing that we do and a lot of organisms do. So if you think that if you think that's the absolute pinnacle of your experience, that the pinnacle of human achievement, I think we need to take a moment of silence to just appreciate the tragedy and the absolute degeneracy that is involved within that. And we have to ask ourselves, what is the definition of superstition? What is the definition of delusion? So just to like do kind of a shit sandwich, what I'll do is lump in a little bit of possible positives before I go back to tearing things apart a little bit more. So of course, possible positives that can possibly open a person up to a wider perspective on themselves and how they show up in the world, which is obviously useful, having a bit more self-awareness, self-reflection, a bit more responsibility and accountability for our actions and how we treat other people. Of course, developing a conscience, basically, is of course a useful thing, which the fact that that's revolutionary for people, like developing a basic function of conscience, again, just proves really the low point at which oftentimes people are starting from. People often don't see the pain that they affect or that they create in the world, or literally feel the pain they cause other people. And I can think of a lot of examples of people with addiction and a lot of other behavioral things that maybe have a lot of improvement from a few sessions of whatever plant medicine. And I think within a clinical setting, under the specific guidance of someone that really knows what they're doing and has had a lot of time and experience working with people, and everything is really clearly laid out, it can obviously be useful to reset someone's system and give them kind of a way to zone out or zoom back out and get a different perspective on their situation, which is only useful and important if that person can reactivate that basic aspect of their organism and then spend the next years integrating it and developing it and making it sort of part of who they are. Just having an experience, just having an insight, just having a perspective is cool, but also like my pinky perfectly fits in my ear and it perfectly fits in my nose. That's an insight, that's a perspective, that's an experience, but it's pretty fucking useless at the end of the day. Versus, developing morality, developing integrity, developing a basic degree of conscience, self-responsibility, and accountability obviously can be quite useful and beneficial. But I think there's many better ways to do it, more useful ways like neurofeedback, and, more active therapies like DBT and CBT, things that can be a little more practical and pragmatic and give people tools. So just that. So getting back to the negative process that I've seen occur within people countless times again is more or less just already being really confused, already being more delusional, anxious, self-absorbed, high degree of identity instability, and then just doing something that makes all of those things worse. But because you felt a lot, because you had a crazy experience, because you had an emotional catharsis, you think and assume that it's forward progress and it's going in the right direction. But like they say, and like they've said throughout human history, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So just because something feels good, looks good, makes you cry or have an emotional catharsis doesn't mean it's in any way, shape, or form useful or developing internal qualities that are going to serve you in life. And unfortunately, a lot of people that get attracted to these kinds of things already have these kinds of personality traits. So then they get into this stuff and oftentimes it just gets worse. And the other dark thing is that more often than not, these kinds of things can attract predatorial types of people that want to exploit obviously vulnerable individuals, because if you're deeply confused and conflicted internally, you are vulnerable. You will be exploited. You will be taken advantage of. It's just a matter of when and who and to what scale and to what degree. And if that sounds harsh or mean, just look at human history. Look at any example of and documentary that's come out over the last 10 years where this just happens time and time and time and time again. Because doing the quote the work just basically makes you better at doing the work, and you find more of the work to do, and you find more shadow things to heal. And just as a side note, the whole concept of the shadow was invented by Carl Jung, which again is just basically original sin repackaged, which is already kind of a ridiculous, kind of broken concept. So you took him with a broken concept, they repackaged it as a broken concept, and now you have this whole community and this whole generation of people that just, it's their religion now. Oh, look, do the shadow work. And they say these vague things like, oh, if people just did their shadow work, the world would be a better place. Or a public figure does something bad. Oh, it's because their shadow. It gives people this kind of generic blanket explanation for all uncomfortable situations in life, which is kind of dumb and not really a useful human trait. And it's kind of what the world has already been doing and presenting. So you're not really creating an alternative. You're not really improving things. You're just doing literally the exact same thing.